Hey Avinash, actually Shorjit here. I've joined from Ishan's account. I'll be joining from my account. So yeah, let's get done with the logistics thing. If anything you
All
want to
right.
check, just yeah.
Do you want to stop recording this part? I mean,
Yes.
my screen.
Uh, yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. All right. Hi guys. Welcome to this session. It's called "Tell a Crisp Story with a Strong Narrative." My name is Avinash Srivastav. I work as team lead product marketing at HighRadius, which is a fintech unicorn for the office of the CFO. I have been working full time with HighRadius since 2019, and before that, I interned with them for a year. So I've been in the content marketing space since 2018. This year, July, I think I'll complete 4 years in this space. And yeah, I have been creating content in all formats since the time I got started. For the past 2 years, I've also been managing and sort of building out content marketing teams in my current role. So I'm, very used to creating and sort of helping new folks create better business content. And from that experience, I have sort of, had some insights that I'd love to share with you all today. So thank you so much for joining and stay tuned. Like Shwarji said, I feel that, I have over created or added more points in this presentation than I'd be able to cover, which is why I feel it's best that we don't do questions in the middle of the presentation. Otherwise, we might not be able to get to the end, but I try to do my best. There are very few, I mean, there's not a lot of people here. So I try to do my best to have some time at the end for Q&A. And, I try to answer all of your questions here itself. But if not, my LinkedIn is there, like the LinkedIn link is there on the presentation. We'll circulate the presentation after the session. So you can find me there. And if there are follow-up questions, I'd love to sort of answer them over social media as well. So yes, thank you so much for joining me. Now, before I could get started, I know you guys are giving me 1 hour of your time, right? So I do not want to, I do not want you to sort of walk into this blindly. I feel expectation setting is very important. So and I know there are some content marketeers here, there are some growth marketeers, digital marketing people here. And I was speaking with Shorajit before, and he also explained to me that the group is very diverse, from business owners to students to freelancers. We have everybody. So I want to be very clear in terms of what will you not learn in this session, right? Because content marketing is a broad space, no matter what many people think. So there are obviously parts of the whole subject that we'll not be covering in this presentation, and I want to call those out specifically. If any of these topics are of interest to you, I'm sure we can do another workshop at some point in the future to cover it in a lot of detail. But yes, today's session is not about any of these, right? So what are these topics? The basics of marketing content creation, right? Like, how do you get started? How do you understand um, the best practices of writing, and business writing versus technical writing versus creative writing? What are all of those differences? That's not something that we'll be covering in this session, which is the first thing that you need to understand in a lot of detail from a content marketing perspective, right? The concepts of target audience, personas, and messaging. This is very important, especially to any of you who is like a business owner, or also, if you're a freelancer working for a business, what is their target audience? What kind of, what's their ideal customer profile? What are the designations and titles of people that business sort of targets? And how do you write for that audience? That's something that you need to understand. Now, this is innate to any topic related to content creation, but it's a very detailed topic of its own. So I'll touch upon this just a little bit, but if you feel that this is something you'd love to explore a little bit more from a content side, then I think this is definitely something we'd need a different session for, right? The third thing I'll not cover is how to come up with interesting content ideas. There are plethora of opportunities and ways to come up with interesting ideas, zingy ideas, hook ideas that will hook other people. we'll not be talking a lot about those. If we have some time in the Q&A and anybody has question, I will share some insights from my experience, but this session will not be diving into the details, right? The fourth thing that we'll also not be talking about is creative copywriting, right? How to do wordplay, how to sort of, like the grammar or parallel construction, or what kind of slide titles to write, or the different kind of titles, all of that, how to write bullet points, when to use paragraphs. Those are things that make a lot of sense from from a business writing perspective. In fact, copywriting is something that you must understand in details before you ever start writing for any business. But again, it's a very, very broad topic, and we'll not be covering that in the session today. And similarly, we'll not be covering grammar or content marketing metrics and analytics, SEO, and Google Analytics, how to see how your content is ranking. All of that are not topics that we are gonna cover in this session today. I know that's a lot of things, and you're probably like, hey, then what are we going to cover? So I'll come to that in just a minute. But yeah, these are not things that we will be doing today. If you want to learn a little bit more about these topics, I'll be happy to take workshops on some of these. And the last one, I'm honestly very, very certain that there are better people in this community to take workshops on. But yeah, so this is none of this is what we will be talking about today, right? So then the question is, what is it that we will talk about today, right? Why are you here? What we will talk about is how you can tell an impactful story after you know the topic that you want to talk about, right? After you know that, hey, this is what I want to talk to my audience about, which would only happen after you know your audience and the way your business writes and everything. How do you make sure that your idea becomes an impactful story? That is something that you'd learn from this session today. How do you connect with the business audience? A lot of time people understand business writing to be very formal, but I think, time and again, it has been proven that even as business owners, it's people who are reading your content, right? So you need to find a good emotional connect even when writing for the business audience. So that is something that you will be learning from this session today, right? Then the third thing that you would also learn is how to fill gaps between yourself and your audience, right? Now, if you are a freelancer, very likely that you're writing for an audience you do not have a direct relationship with, right? Sometimes you're writing for clients in the US, sometimes you're writing for clients in the UK, and maybe other geographies as well. Or you are a 22-year-old writing for a business whose target audience is 45-year-old. Obviously, there is a gap, cultural difference, experience difference, understanding difference, right? On the topic, on the subject matter. How do you fill that gap? That is something we try to cover a little bit, while telling a story. That's something we'll try to cover in the story today. And the last one is the most important thing, according to me, and like the best one as well, is what are the most common generic silly mistakes that you can and must avoid rather while telling a story, right? So those are the key themes and the key topics that I'll be talking about. And I'm very, very excited to get started. All right. So what is a narrative, right? I feel that it's a very difficult, it's a very difficult topic to explain, at least according to me. So if somebody would probably want to write on chat, what do you think a narrative is? And, if you had to sort of describe a narrative in one word, please, why don't you guys go ahead? And I'd love to read out some of those points, and we'll see, what just everybody's thought is about this topic. Anybody? You can use the chat option. I know we want the session to be very interactive.
Yeah, I don't think there is anyone who is at the moment willing to write, but yeah.
That's all right. That's totally fine, guys. Okay, so the narrative, in my opinion, is the main difference between how you tell a story and then how your audience perceives it, right? The narrative, by the very nature, needs to be audience-centric. It is something that lends a structure to your communication. It's the It's the difference between a random idea in your head and a very structured blog on a piece of paper or on a website, right? So that is what a narrative is meant to be and what it does, right? What happens when you write with a story with a good narrative is that it flows very easily. It finds a lot of emotional connect with the audience. It makes it easy for your audience to take the next step, and it makes your audience want to invest some of their time, right? What happens when you have a story without a proper narrative? See, I don't think a bad narrative exists, right? I think it's a very personal choice. It's very difficult to say that's a bad way of telling the story. What happens more often than not is people don't have a structure to telling a story at all, right? And when that's the case, what usually happens is that your story is confusing, it's difficult to follow, borderline annoying as well, right? Because somebody is trying to read and then they're like, why is this thing going in circles and why is it not making sense? And uh, obviously, it has a very high bounce rate. People will go off the page as soon as they can. And if it's a webinar or presentation, they'll just walk out of it right away, right? So that's the main difference between a good narrative and a bad narrative. Just a second. Okay.
I think Soumya has written something.
Narrative, who tells the story? Not really, Soumya. I think narrative is less about who tells the story, but more about how they are telling the story, right? For example, right now I am telling the story, but the narrative is more about the structure that I'm following to tell the story, the way I'm moving through the slides and sort of connecting every slide back to you, right? That's more of how I'd define a narrative. Right. But who am I? I mean, I know I sort of told you that, okay, this is who I am, this is my designation and all of that. I don't think that's very exciting. Yes, I lead a product marketing team at a fintech unicorn. I also am a part of this program called Global Governance Initiative, where I spent a lot of time learning management communications from some of the experts in the field. What I've also done in a more personal capacity is, I've written at least 250 plus content pieces for my current organization, which is HighRadius. In fact, I think I have some people from my team joining us on this call today. I'm sure they can vouch for that. In the last 2 years, I've worked with 15 plus freshers or college grads, and sort of have them get started on content marketing. It's one of the biggest pleasures of my professional career, and I love to talk about it. And I am in the process of publishing my own poetry book. I've been writing poems since 2016, 2015. I have been doing a lot of creative writing in my personal space, and that sort of transcends into me telling business stories in my current role, right? So that's a little bit more about who I am and why I care about this subject and why I'm here on a Saturday evening, sort of telling you about it, right? But just a second, it's something's wrong with my keypad. Okay. But I'm not talking about me, in order to flex, though. I mean, if I had to, I'd probably use a different medium than this one, right? This part of me introducing myself is sort of the first step of building a story or building a narrative. And this is from where you can probably start writing down if you want to take some notes, because we'll cover a series of very actionable things that you must be doing, right? So step one when trying to tell a story is to build credibility. Like I try to do by giving you my credentials and saying, hey, this is why what I've done and why you should probably listen to my thoughts on how to tell a story. I'm giving you two examples here. As per a recent survey conducted by McKinsey, 75% executives believe that customer experience is important. If anybody here does not know McKinsey, it's one of the largest consulting companies in India and the world. It's actually MBB, McKinsey, BCG, Bain are the three biggest giants, and all business writers actually refer to at least one McKinsey article when creating any content, right? So if you are ever writing for a business, please go check them out and you'll see that they have extremely amazing insights to share. But anyway, then the second way, and this is just two people starting off a story. The second way is, hey, in today's day and age, companies must focus on customer experience, right? Both of them saying almost the same thing. The summary is that customer experience is important. But which of them is the better way to start a blog, right? Definitely the first one, especially if you know the context and the background of McKinsey and how and why it exists. You'd always feel that the first one is more impactful than the second one. Without credibility, no one cares, right? If your first line is a very generic definition of customer experience or whatever topic it is that you're writing about, or it's one of those quotes, right? I see a lot of people doing that. They start off with this quote and nobody cares. I mean, unless it's a very well-known quote, it's like a very celebrated person who your audience can make instant connect with. Nobody cares, right? You need to build credibility. Credibility is the replacement of introduction from 2010. Back like a decade back, you could start off a topic with a definition, but today, don't do that, right? I don't think anybody has that kind of time or energy to invest in reading a piece. So how do you build credibility? The easiest way is to use a lot of data, right? Like I did in the McKinsey example, like I did by telling you that, hey, I've worked on 250 plus content stories, right? Data is just easy to connect with. You're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This person must know a little bit of what he's trying to talk about. But the other way to build credibility is, you find an emotional connect, right? You tell the audience why you are the right person to talk about this topic. Like, hey, HighRadius did a COVID survey, and this is, by the way, a real blog starting introduction that I've written, because we were concerned about how CFOs will get impacted because of the pandemic, right? You find that emotional connect. People don't care about COVID or HighRadius in that sentence. They care about this survey, and they care about, oh, why did HighRadius go ahead and do it, right? What you shouldn't do to build credibility is don't delve too much on introduction, definition, not out of theory. Like, don't do that. And the other thing you can also do is to share past experiences, right? In the sense that, okay, we struggled with very bad customer experience in the last year. When you write something like that, and somebody who's reading it is also like, oh yes, I had that similar problem, they'd be hooked. They'd want to read further. They'd find you a credible source for sharing that information. However, there's just a quick side note here. If the experience that you're writing about is too much in the past, then you need to understand, or you need to like double check if the topic, the idea that you're writing about itself is timely, right? What does that mean? If I start writing a blog today and I want to say, in the first few months of COVID, my business was terribly impacted. The first few months of COVID was very, very, very far back now. I know we're still in the whole crisis situation, so it's difficult to feel that way, but that was like 2 years ago. Since then, at least 1,000 plus people have used that beginning, have told the same story. That story is not timely anymore. Now people want to care about 2022. They're not all stuck in 2020, right? So if that's the way you are thinking about it, also do the check. Oh, is my past experience too much in the past? Because in that case, very likely that it's not a very timely story to tell. So yeah, that's the step one. That is, building a lot of credibility. And these are some of the ways in which you can do that just to start off your narrative. Right, you hook them. Very cool. Now, will they read the content further though? Very unlikely. I'll be very honest, guys. Okay, I write for a business, so my job is 70% reading stuff online. I open a topic and it's very relevant topic, right? Something that I can definitely use in my next article or next content idea. And then I read something, I read like the first paragraph maybe, and then I'm like, okay, this is not the point. I skim through, try to read, okay, this is the bullet point, this is the most important part of what they're trying to say, go through it, and then I get out of it, right? You don't have that kind of time and energy. It's not a course book. You don't have to read everything. You only pick and choose what's important, and then you move past it, right? Now, this is, I'm sure a lot of you read that way, right? And some of you, if you're younger than I am, then your consideration span is even considerably lower, right? I'm seeing that with people who join my team every new year. So there are two scenarios here. You read a catchy title, and you click on a blog, and the first paragraph is interesting. Sarojit, I'm not able to check my chat, but if there is anything at any point, just feel free to jump in and let me know, okay?
Sure. Actually, it was me only who wrote a question, but yeah, fine.
Okay, great. All right. So what if the topic I'm writing about is very new and there are not many reports or case studies about it? How do I build credibility then? I think then, like I said, right, you have to go with the second point of building emotional credibility. If it's a very new topic, why do you care? Why do you want to write about it? And why do you feel that somebody will care about it? See, whenever you are diving into a new topic, you have to find a reason to do it. It's not like that idea will come and pop up unless you feel about it. An example, right? I once wrote a presentation. I did a presentation on expectations and conflict management in the finance world, which is a very unknown topic, to be very honest. Not a lot of people talk about it, right? It's not HR or marketing. The reason I came up with that topic is because I had a situation where I had a conflict with a member on my leadership team that day, and I was like sort of brainstorming ideas in the future. And I was like, hey, I'm sure something like this happens with my target audience too. Shouldn't I talk a little bit about it? When I started doing research, nothing about that topic existed. So I started building out that whole story from my personal experience. It's one of my best story beginnings, so I'll probably try to tell what it was towards the end. But yes, that's the short answer. That if there's not a lot of data backing what you want to do, then you need to find that emotional connect, or at least give examples to explain why you're writing about that topic. Say something on the lines of, I was in a meeting today, it did not go well, and that led me to think, how many of you are struggling with managing stakeholder relationships? Right? That's a very strong way to start off a conversation, or start off a presentation. Does that help?
Uh, yeah, Avinash. I know one thing. Just adjust your mic a bit. Your voice is getting a bit muffled.
Oh, all right. Just a second. Okay, cool. I hope this should be better.
Yeah, it's better now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Uh, right. So I was talking about these two scenarios here, right? You read a catchy title in a blog. The first paragraph is interesting. By the time you get to the second one, you still feel, okay, this content is not coming to the point. Whatever was in the title, I've still not gotten it. You skim through, you probably read a few bullet points, and you bounce off. Then you read another paragraph. It's a different topic, and then after the first paragraph, the author breaks the wall and sort of says, hey, if you read my content, this will happen for you or your business, right? It's a way of switching tones, but not changing narratives, right? Or not changing the story that you are telling. Which content piece will you read in greater detail? uh, it's going to be the second one, right? Because immediately after setting the context or giving the credibility, uh, you know, your your content is sort of saying, okay, is customer experience an issue for your business? If somebody asks that question, you're forced to sort of answer that question, right? You're like, oh yes, I mean, I need to say something here. And then in order to find answers to the question that's popping up, you'll want to move back and see, okay, what's next? What does this person has to tell me about this topic, right? So step number two, besides the credibility, credibility is not making your audience care. Credibility is doing the bare minimum. It's just hooking them. It's just like, oh yeah, this person can talk about this topic, right? The second step is the more important one, in the sense that after they know you can talk about this topic, they need to feel, oh, I want to hear this person talk about this topic, right? And how do you do that? One of my favorite ways to do it myself is the using the conflict part of the character conflict resolution framework. If you're not familiar with this framework, it's a very easy framework for content creation, the 101, if I may call it, where what you do is you have a character, you build out who am I writing this blog for, and you make them the central character of your story, that, hey, you are XYZ person. Then you try to understand what is their problem, and you make that the biggest conflict in your story, that if you are a finance audience right now, you're supposed to be caring about customer experience, because without that, your CFO will not like you. That's the conflict part. And then you move on to sort of doing the resolution in later parts of the story. The conflict part of the story, which is, is how you introduce, or rather make your audience care. And I wanted to share an example because I don't want it to become very preachy. So assuming that we are going with the same same customer experience story. What I'm trying to tell is use questions to help them connect with your conflict and premise, which is what I was just talking about, right? After you said 75% executives are focusing on customer experience, break the wall, say, is your company struggling with this too? Are you losing money because of ruining customer experience? You need to tie more often than not, these questions need to tie with the real world concern, right? And what is the real world concern for a business owner or for a client? It's revenue, reputation, risk to existence, the three R's basically. So you need to ask these questions, which should come into, okay, which should basically make me feel, hey, if I don't know the answer to this, it would either affect my bottom line or my revenue, or it will sort of ruin my reputation in the market for not being up to the date, or it will pose a significant risk to my business. Trust me, when you add these elements or this kind of a question immediately after building the credibility, your audience will, get further hooked, and that you'll have achieved that I need to read this story beyond I want to read the story. After you have done that, after you've built the credibility, and then you've sort of given enough examples, or rather ask questions that makes your audience connect immediately, you need to jump to step number 3. In the abstract or the rough description that I've written for this topic, I said I'll tell you 6 things, 2 of which many people miss. This is one of them for sure. I have so many content examples off the top of my mind where people just forget adding any form of relatability. And very often than not, in business content, it comes out of, hey, I'm not writing for a B2C audience, I'm writing for a B2B audience. Again, so a human being is reading your story. If they don't relate with it, if they can't see themselves be the character in your story, they are going to jump out of it, right? 2 examples of sentences after you have asked that question. Many people in your position have been tasked by the executive to improve customer satisfaction. If you are one of those, we have some answers for you. The other is, you must focus on customer satisfaction and delight. Let us tell you what you should be doing. Obviously, you'll add some faff here to get to a certain word limit and everything, but which is the better one to go? I would say the first one, right? And what does the first one do in sort of differently from the second one? It helps build the relatability, right? It uses that you language, the second person, your position have been tasked by the executive or your leadership, if you want to change that there, right? Then I'm like, oh yeah, this person is talking to me. This presentation, this content, this blog is meant for me. And then the content creator is like, hey, yeah, this person knows me, this person knows my challenges. Yes, maybe I should go in and listen to what are the answers that he's giving me. Now, some tips to amp up your relatability. Obviously, guys, I want this to be very actionable, which is why, these tips you should directly start applying instead of just sort of saying, oh yeah, I want my content to be relatable. Now, what are some tips to amp up your relatability? You should use generic personalized recommendations. Now, I know very often you are writing for a huge audience, so you can't just hyper personalize your content, right? You can't always say things like CFOs of Fortune 500 companies are dealing with this, because you don't know, some other CFO of a smaller business might be reading that content and it might actually make sense to you as well. So in order to change that, you can use factors such as age, demographic, and cultural aspects, if you are aware of those, to sort of create more generic personalized recommendations. In the example that's given here, I have used the fact that we are all working in a business at the same time, which is COVID, right? It's a generic recommendation. Any business leader who exists in the world today would follow and would understand that you are among the generation of business leaders caught by the COVID storm. Hence, the rules of managing customers from before don't apply to you. But it's still a very strong sort of relatability factor, or just makes people connect a lot more than saying something on the lines of the rules of managing customer experience from before doesn't apply to you any further. I'll take some of the questions probably after this slide. Um, then the other thing that you need to do is you need to understand the brand voice and tone in order to help them create an identity for you in their head, right? A lot of these conversations or a lot of blogs, if you are actually doing well on the relatability factor, would look like an advice coming from a more senior leader, a friend, a colleague, or somebody you know from they know from their business, right? If you are able to do that, that's a huge win for you. Now, as freelancers, it's something that that's probably a little bit difficult. I think you have to spend some time to understand the brand voice and brand tone, and it's a entirely separate topic from this one. But yes, the easiest way to do is read everything else that the company has put out there and understand what's that making you feel like, because that's the same kind of emotion your content should also invoke. If you're able to get there, then you are maintaining that continuity with the brand and also sort of being relatable to the audience. Write how the audience talks. It's a very, very, very generic recommendation. But personally, I like this one better, which says write shorter sentences and longer sentences to avoid monotony. Don't write like 5-word sentences or 10-word sentences and just go with the flow, because honestly, people don't talk that way. Your content will start coming across to be monotonic and robotic, and you will lose people here. Shurji, do you want to take some questions? Like, let me know of some questions that are popping up. I see the chats popping up really.
We don't have any question, but like we have some really good feedback. People are really liking this.
Hey guys, thank you so much. This is very helpful. But yes, I want to sort of get through, like I said, there are quite a few slides. So if I am not able to take your questions, uh, I will definitely try my best to, take it at the end. So, Shorjit, how are we doing on time?
We still have 1 hour left.
Okay, great. I'll probably try to spend more time on the presentation, guys, because I want to give you examples on everything that I'm saying. Otherwise, it will make very little sense, right? So let's go and do that. And then I'd love to take your questions. I'll definitely try to keep as much time as possible. Okay, cool. This is something, and I was talking about this story earlier, so I'll probably talk about that introduction, Sharajit, here. In certain instances, taking your lived in experience and extrapolating those to see how they apply to your audience can help you create a very strong connect or relatability factor. Now, that's a very long sentence. What does that mean? Um, you are a 22-year-old fresher, right? And you are writing for an audience which is a 50-year-old white man who has spent 30 years in an industry as boring as finance, because that's what I was doing like 2 years back, and I'm still doing, right? And then you're like, okay, how am I writing to this audience, right? You always get that imposter syndrome. Does that make sense? How am I capable enough, or why should I be the one writing this or whatever, right? Um, Take your lived in experiences that you might be able to, that you think they will be able to relate with, and take that as a content idea and build a story around that. For example, when I first started leading my own team, I was able to foresee a lot of challenges that comes with managing a Gen Z team. Now, again, I am not that older compared to people on my team, but you get the general idea. Oh, this is what the young talent, the college grad talent. These are some of their challenges from a corporate perspective. And as a team lead, I was like, oh, how do I figure this out, right? And then I thought, I'm sure finance leaders who are also in their 50s and are actually further beyond me are facing similar challenges, because they are also getting a workforce that's coming straight out of college and joining them, right? Um, and I have some context because I have very friendly relationship with people I work with. Maybe they don't. So that was a lived in experience. That was my experience that, hey, managing a Gen Z workforce is a bit challenging and the rules are different than managing, say, a millennial workforce. And you create a story on that. When you will do that, right, you'll be able to add a lot of perspectives to that story. You'll be able to add a lot of, experience, examples in that story and stuff like that, which is why something like this would really amp up your relatability factor. Uh,
Avinash, sorry to interrupt. Can you again fix your mic?
oh, I think it's not about my mic. I think it's my posture. Just a second. Cool.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Is this better?
Yeah, it's much better.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I was sharing this expectations versus conflict management story before, right? Like I said, that was my lived-in experience. I had, a row with somebody on my leadership team, and I was like, okay, how do people deal with something like that? And I went and I created a presentation about it. So that is what I mean, right? If you're at a, if you're at a roadblock and you're like, hey, I don't know how to write this, see if there's any personal experience of yours that you can bring into the into the story that you're trying to tell. I think that will amp up your relatability factor. um, I feel very strongly about this particular topic, even in the entire idea of narrative design, because many content creators miss relatability, and I also call it recredibility, because you're establishing your credibility again in context with the audience, and sort of jump into solutioning. The character conflict resolution framework. You introduce the conflict and you jump to resolution without spending any time on adding the relatability. So this is why I feel very strongly about it. So whenever you're creating a story for a business audience the next time, see where is the example where they'll feel, oh yes, this is for me. This content is meant to be read by me. Popular storytelling frameworks like CCR, which I just explained, and SkyPAB, which stands for situation, conflict, actually it's situation, complication, implication, position, action, and benefits. And I'll talk about what these storytelling frameworks are. But even these frameworks don't specify that, hey, you need to add relatability, you need to add examples, or you need to sort of add any level of detail to find that emotional connect. But with the business world changing as it is, um, you need to stop jumping from conflict to resolution and double down on relatability. Then, step number 4, after you have built the relatability and your audience is very strongly feeling, oh yeah, this is meant for me, is that you need to arrive at solutioning, right? You have introduced the conflict, and now you have to explain how are you going to solve for that conflict, right? And there are two ways you could write it. You can always add that, hey, we can advise you on the best ways to not just improve your experience with customers or existing customers, but also onboard new customers seamlessly through a combination of process improvement and automation techniques. It's almost an introduction again, right? But now you are introducing the solution, you're not introducing the problem statement. Then there's the other more direct way. There are 5 ways in which our software can help improve customer experience. Which one feels less salesworthy and more trustworthy, right? That's obviously example number 1, because it's not directly jumping to solution features and stuff like that. And like I said, a good solution almost always reestablishes your credibility. If you read that sentence, we can do this by doing this, right? That's the way people find, oh yeah, that does make sense. I mean, this person has spent time explaining to me who they are, why I should care about what they're talking about. Then they have also made me feel that this story is for me, and now they're again telling me this is what they are able to do in umbrella terms without sort of jumping on the opportunity. If number 1 to 3 is done right, then your customers will look forward to your solutioning. Now, quick thing here goes out of my telling a story. Lately, what I've started seeing is that a lot of people, in the name of writing thought leadership articles, have started eliminating solutioning from their content itself, right? They're like, oh, I don't want to be salesy. My content is like very thought leadership, so I'll not have a solution. That's a terrible idea. You can't, I mean, imagine having a story where, like, the hero and the villain have a conflict and they end the story there without telling you who won and how they won. That's a terrible thing to do to anybody who is invested in your story, right? So don't skip on solutioning. That's not at all what thought leadership means. So please don't do that. However, there are better ways to do solutioning than many of us are used to. First and foremost, when solutioning, don't switch tones, don't become salesy. Not only is it off-putting, it also breaks continuity and disrupts the mental image, right? that your reader has been forming. If any of you are into reading books, fiction novels and stuff like that, I'm sure you have that thing where where they describe a character and you can envision them in your mind. Similarly, non-fiction, business writing, if you are telling a story properly, there's a mental image that's working in the mind. The minute you switch tone and become salesy, that mental image is disrupted. Your audience is out of the trance of reading your story and very quickly out of your page. Okay. So that is one. Don't obviously become salesy. Then, before talking about ways to solve the problem, maybe touch upon how you came to be about in the space of solving it, right? Uh, for example, if I have to explain how I can help people be more customer centric, instead of saying something on the lines of, um, we care about you or stuff like that, if I say something on the lines of being a customer centric organization ourselves, we understand the need of internal collaboration to deliver exceptional customer service, which is why our processes are set a certain way, and which is what we want to, or we are going to try to do for you. Something like that, right? Then people are like, okay, yes, this person's recommendations are more heartfelt and experienced versus sort of derived out of a product messaging, which is the better way to do a solutioning. If you can't talk about yourself, because I mean, if you are a freelancer writing for a business, a lot of that context is not very easy to come by, right? You can't claim that processes of a company are set a certain way if you're not a part of the organization yourself. Then even then, your solutioning should always be more about telling them what they can do or what you would want them to do. Sorry, telling them what they can do instead of telling them what you want them to do, right? The whole do this never works. You always need to be like, hey, these are some ways or some directions in which you can think. You never want to give out the complete answer, because if you do that, then you're essentially leaving nothing on the table for your inside sales, your sales department, or whoever is the next department that comes after marketing. Uh, to make up for any mistakes in solutioning, I feel, I mean, like I said, solutioning is difficult. Um, you try to be like very good about it, and you can still end up becoming salesy or going into too much technical details and stuff like that. If that is your concern, give a lot of examples after introducing solutioning. This is the second part of the narrative that I see a lot of people miss out. Again, I'm not saying you have to always give examples, but it does make your case stronger in more cases. For example, if I have given that whole story about customer experience, working with us helped a leading e-commerce practitioner become a customer experience leader. As you are well aware, here is what we did for them, and there's a link, right? Then you say something on the other lines of, and trust me, be honest, this is how most of us end our story after writing features. The above examples and features are just the ice tip. There is so much more that we can help you with when it comes to improving customer experience. Again, the first example is more uh, fact, and the second one is more faff, right? Here is what we did for them. You're almost certain to, if you have, I mean, followed all the things right to this point, and you have, built that innate curiosity, your people are almost certain to click on that. But there's a very high likelihood that example number two would not make them feel anything except saying, oh yeah, okay, that does make sense. Okay, sure, why not? Adding solutions or examples does two things, right? It builds on your solutioning. You can take one or two features from the larger product suite that you have. Like I said, don't dive too much into the features part of it, but you can take one or two features and explain the longer business benefits that you're able to deliver. By the way, an example of an example would be a success story, a client case study, stuff like that, which is not a part of your main narrative, but is included as a link somewhere for customers to get redirected to, or for your readers to get redirected to. Besides that, also from a business perspective, an example or case study for that matter is, it's very good consolation prize, right? See, people, if you write one great blog or three great blogs for that matter, the chances of people clicking on your CTA or ending is still very minimal. It takes a lot more to convince people to make buying decisions. So, but then as a consolation prize, if they are still clicking on that success story to learn, hey, yeah, this was the solutioning, and this is how you helped out XYZ particular company, then that's a consolation prize, because that shows some interest in what you have done, what you do, and is therefore a win for you and your story. Now, step number 6, end the story with a call to action. Uh, if you have ever attended a mad over marketing workshop, Siddharth More calls it call to value. I like that terminology. I'm very blatantly copy pasting it here, but this is what I'm trying to tell you in terms of example. And this is not a copied example. The example is mine. Just the terminology call to value is copied. Example 1, you did everything. You gave a case study, and then your last line says, if you would like to save $4 million, which is typically how much an enterprise business loses in a year owing to poor customer experience, subscribe to our newsletter, because that's your call to action. And then your example 2 says, subscribe to our newsletter and gain latest insights on how to improve your customer experience, right? Come on. $4 million. Everybody knows which one would more get you more subscriptions on your newsletter. And that is what I call to value. Having that at the end, sorry, just a second. Yes, having that at the end, that number, that value, that is the most important thing, and that will get you more people to click on your CTA. I'm sorry about that. There was some disruption in my background. This is the end of the first part, which is the 6 steps of building a narrative. We talked about credibility, then we talked about making the audience care, then we talked about relatability or adding the relatability factor. Then we talked about solutioning, then we talked about examples, and then we ended with call to value. And then we sort of touched on what are the different things that you need to do in order to make each of those happen. Sharjit, voice fine?
Yeah, it's fine. Voice is fine. We have some very good feedback and also one question if you want to take it
Yes.
now.
Cool. Can you read it out?
Yeah, question is by Shweta. She's asking, can you elaborate more on generic personalized recommendation with an example? How can a recommendation be generic if it's personalized?
Exactly. That's what I was trying to explain, Shweta. Generic personalized recommendations is when you take a certain age group, for example, or you take a certain demographic and then make recommendations, which is still generic. For instance, if you are writing for a business, you know, like during the Christmas holidays, and you're in a business which sort of I don't know, sells. I mean, if you're writing for Zara during Christmas holidays, just to simplify it a lot further. Now, you know that while Zara sells to everybody from kids to like the older population, most likely the 20 to 25-year age group is the one that's like the most likely to buy something from there. And you also want to talk about like, how do you say, a sale probably that's going on in the organization. So then you can create, owing to a 20 to 25-year group, girl, boy, what are their tastes, likes, dislikes, the latest movie that's probably there, which you can introduce in your story. If you are able to understand that key broad target audience, in the sense that, it's 20 to 25-year age group girl is still a very broad target audience, then you can sort of write personalized recommendations to that group, knowing their interest, knowing their what kind of pop culture are they into, and you can use that while writing your recommendations. That is a generic personalized recommendation. It's not hyper personalized in the sense that you are not saying you're not saying something on the lines of uh, this how do you say it? You're not saying something on the lines of this book or this story, and then sort of going all out on it. You're not betting on one thing, but you are creating multiple forms of the copy or examples by knowing a larger audience base and demographic. I think you would need to understand your ideal customer profile and the key personas a little bit more in order to get that. But yes, you can be generic personalized without being hyper personalized and without just saying, hey, Zara has a sale going on, it's Christmas, come shop with us. And then I think I shared another example as the form of the presentation as well. If you're writing for a business audience, saying something on the lines of, hey, we are all in the boat of COVID together. That's a generic personalized thing. It's still applicable to a very broad audience group, but it brings a lot of people from different facets together versus saying something on the lines of a CPG company which deals with holiday is impacted, which deals in holiday greetings and gift cards is impacted in a certain way, right? So that's hyper personalization. What I gave you was generic personalization, and very simple terminology would be COVID is here and customer experience is ruined, or something to that effect. Okay.
Okay, Avinash, this helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Best practices that I have learned after making 1,000 plus mistakes. I mean, I think that's undermining, but sure. Boring your audience is a fatal error. I hope I'm not doing that, guys, as I write it. If I am boring you, that's probably very ironic. But yeah, here is why, what I'm trying to tell you. Understand that you're not writing a Wikipedia page. When you're writing for a business, you're not supposed to, I mean, you're not writing so that a school student can research about customer experience from your blog and, paste it in their 12th grade final report and get 97 marks out of it. You're not writing a Wikipedia page. You don't have to give a lot of details. You don't have to set context and everything. That's a very easy way of boring your audience, and you should not do it. Second is my favorite. Understand that what might be net new information for you might be old news to your readers. This is something I see a lot, right? People come up to me with an idea, and they're like, what I want to talk about? I want to talk about how because of COVID, customer experience is impacted, just to go with the theme. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Now, if you will talk on, and you write an article on this, and you'll research the world out of this topic, and you'll put it in front of an audience, and your audience says, oh yeah, I've been in the business for 30 years. I know customer experience is important. So what else? And that's the huge experience perception gap that I was talking about back when we started this presentation, right? A lot of time as marketeers, it's very easy rather to get attached to what you're writing. You spend 7-8 hours of research on some topic. You're like, oh yeah, I mean, this is so cool. Why is nobody talking about it? I see very few articles about it on the internet. Amazing. I would be the first one to, make a difference in the world. Very cool idea. The reason not a lot of businesses are talking about it is because your audience doesn't need to share about it. It's an idea so explored that nobody wants to read about it. So you want to get that gap correctly, right? Every time you think something is interesting or new to the market, ask yourself, is it new to my client as well? I'll give you an example, or I'll give you another example, right? If in today's world of business, you're writing about revenue, how to improve your revenue, or how to introduce technology, these are known ideas. No matter what aspect of technology you are diving into, you're not creating net new information for your reader. They might know the technology, which is fine, but it's not impressive and it can get boring easily. Versus if you are anywhere talking about sustainability, climate change, these are the conversations that are going to form the world of business in the next 10 years. That's a new idea. Then even if you're introducing with, hey, a sustainable business is defined as something that will work in the long run, I think people will be like, oh yeah, I mean, they're still talking about a net new idea. So that's a very important difference to keep in mind, that what's net new to you is possibly not net new to your audience, right? Also understand that too much detail disrupts the flow of reading and is bound to result in increased exit rates. Now, I've said this before, don't write a Wikipedia page. You started off a topic, customer experience is defined as this, as per X organization this. Netflix and Amazon are the best companies with customer experience, disruptive customer experience, blah, blah, blah. What? You gave me so much detail that I could hardly, catch my breath before reading the sentence. But I have not learned anything net new from it. I know Netflix and Amazon are great companies and they are delivering exceptional customer experience. I know customer experience is important. I've been running a business or owning a business, or owning a part of the business for so many years. All you have done is annoyed me and disrupted my flow of reading if you added things like this in the middle of your content. So don't do that. It's boring, it's annoying, and it's very likely to sort of get you out. Chronology works best for human psychology. Many people can't appreciate a zigzag storytelling pattern. A lot of people who are, I don't know, who are fans, I don't know, of this movie Andhadhun, right? I know. Is there a lot of people here who are a fan?
I watched another one. I really liked it.
Yes.
Yeah, I have also watched.
No, I've watched is the one. Are you a fan of the movie? I mean, it got great critics feedback, right? And then people were dying. I remember I'd not seen it for like 3 weeks, and people in my office almost shamed me to watch it. So, are you a fan? Anybody?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Um, I'm not, very honestly. I'll tell you why. It's a very confusing story, and it keeps you guessing, and you're like, okay, what's happening? Parts of it are just that rabbit dies at the beginning, and then he comes back in the end, and I was just like, what's happening? What is the structure of the story? I know many people can appreciate it. There are a lot of people who love that movie. Also because of the acting and everything, but many people also can't appreciate a zigzag storytelling pattern, and more importantly, many people can't do it well, right? So it's very often, if you are also a new to the world of business writing, and in general, it's safe to not play games and go back and forth in time when working with written content. Not everyone likes to be challenged. What is an example of doing this? You start off this saying, in the next few months, companies around the world will invest $500 million to improve their customer experience. Then you go in the past and you say, COVID had led to a lot of companies realize and see this as an area of importance. And what this is doing is it's changing the business game today. And then you go back and you start talking about something in the future. Write something like that, okay? Like take some time out, write a paragraph where you don't follow the past to present and read it. You will have a very difficult time understanding what you are writing, right? It's almost always a good idea to say the past, that hey, COVID happened, and because of it, this happened. And because of that, this is happening in the present. And so in the near future, this is what we can expect, like $500 million in investment, a lot of 70% of which will go into technology, which is why you should learn about this session or hear about this technology. Just try to write these two sentences or rather paragraphs on your own, and you will understand. It's not about the zing or the creativity. It's just about the basic understanding. The second version is easy to read, easy to follow. Nothing against Andhadhun, guys. Just like in general, written content is easy, difficult to move like that. Video content can still work out sometimes. Sorry. So do that and you'll understand what I'm trying to say. Past, present, and the future. 95% of the stories should and must follow that chronological order. I know it's very less risky per se, but it's the one that will connect the most, right? For example, in terms of the narrative that we were talking about, or we have been talking about, right? Customer experience being important is a known fact from the past. McKinsey has already established 75% people have already said it. Your audience losing money or losing business because of it is most likely happening in the present, which was the make your audience care part, right? We said that. Are you tasked by your executive? Are you losing money? Stuff like that. Them buying your solution and fixing their problem is a part of the future or the desired future for you. That's the right way of telling a story. Imagine writing a story which starts off with, hey, we are a company that deals with a customer experience solution and you must buy it. These are the capabilities, these are the features and everything. And then you say, by the way, the reason you should do it is because you might be losing money today. It's just like very bad reading experience, right? So stick with that way of telling a story as much as you can. I know some people are like, oh, that's not interesting. Again, what's interesting to you might not be interesting to your reader, right? And you always have to think more about them versus how you want to write. Okay, descriptive transitions are okay. Short is not always sweet. How many people I have seen, and I don't know where this comes from, they're like, oh, that's like very long. I want to cut it down. I want to cut it down, especially when they're writing, like titles and stuff like that. They're like, hey, 80 characters is the limit and stuff like that. And I'm moving from one slide to the other. I don't want it to feel like a paragraph and stuff like that. I understand. Yes, short is better, less attention span, get the idea. But descriptive transitions are okay. If you're moving from one story to other, it's okay to take a pause and say, hey, yes, I'm moving from one story to other. And you can have a long heading, you can have a slide lead. What is a slide lead? It's different from a slide title. A slide, for example, a title for this particular slide that you are looking at right now could just be writing descriptive transitions. That's enough. But but when you say descriptive transitions are okay, short is not always sweet. It connects with the story that has been going on, right? That is an example of a slide lead. It's generally longer than a title, and it's perfectly okay to use those. It's also okay to use separators. It's also okay to use headings, and all of that is really fine. Oftentimes, when transitioning from one section of a story to other, people add a lot of details to make this transition seamless, right? That's how you're going from probably establishing the relatability to the solutioning, especially that part. Everybody has like 100 things they add there, and it does nothing. That transition is not seamless. The only thing it does is it confuses the reader, and they're like, Acha, where did all of this detail come from? It's okay to add a new title or slide lead for presentations, or add longer headings in case of written blogs, to tell your audience very clearly that, hey, until this point, I said, okay, this is what you will learn from us on process improvement and automation is the solution. And then you can have a long heading which says how XYZ can help you improve your processes. That's totally fine. It's a very common misconception that you shouldn't have very long headings and stuff like that. That's totally okay. You can always do a combination of both, actually, especially if you're trying to do a presentation, right? For example, in this presentation, if you saw at the beginning, when I had to introduce credibility, there was no big slide which said, okay, number one is credibility. I did my introduction and I built that story, and we talked about credibility. So that is a very seamless transition where there was no disruption. But then when we had to start this part of the section, which was things that I have learned, I used the separator. I took a pause, let it, it was a long title, and that's okay. Both of those things are fine. It's a creative call that you have to make. If somebody is telling you from a storytelling perspective one is better than the other, they are not saying the right thing. It depends a lot on who you're writing for, and there's no other right way of doing it, for sure. Unique content elements are welcome as long as they don't take away from your story. Best case, they should support your story. A lot of time people are like, hey, I want to add this. I want to add a video to my presentation. Very cool. Okay, sure, let's do it. Or I want to add, I don't know, something, background music to a video, which, and you're like, okay, that's okay. You should do it. Many of us do it. It's a good idea, but it should not take away from your story. In a case where it will support your story, it's actually a lot more welcome. An example, I've not done it in this presentation because I was not sure about the logistics and everything, but very often I try to add poll questions where I know what the audience will say, or what a majority of the audience will say, and then I use that as a means to move to the set point. An example being, I'll ask a question, are you worried about customer experience? I know 80% people, 90% people will say yes. So then you say, the next slide is, since the majority of the people are, let's move on. That's just an estimated guess that you can take. It's a unique content element. It doesn't necessarily fit into your story, but it's totally okay to do that. Food for thought boxes. Food for thought questions. did you know call out boxes that don't fit in the story, but ties strongly with the next stated fact, those are also okay, right? I remember this, writing paragraphs and long paragraphs and coming up with an 800-word article when a colleague of mine just, put a lot of it. I mean, she designed a creative actually, and she put like 5 questions to answer as a part of that image. And an image is obviously not taken in word count. And her content came out to be 550 words, I believe. And it was appreciated more because same things, but she used a different content element. The experience was different, but at the same time, the story that we were telling was almost the exact same. So that is also okay. If somebody's telling you, okay, no, that is disrupting, that's the experience is breaking, none of that makes sense. It's totally fine. In fact, there's an example from an article that I'll probably share in the group at a later point where Accenture strategy, I think, has done it very beautifully. Background music in a video that with the effects, showcasing in action on screen. For example, if there's a video, for example, where you're trying to say an email going out, right? And you want to add that whoosh sound in the background, something like that is okay. It's actually desirable because it helps tell your story without really saying, oh, that email was sent out. This is if you're reading the presentation earlier, I said I'll share an example of something that video content creators add to move their story forward without calling it out. That's background music. It's appreciated. It should just fit in your narrative and it should make sense. That very loud dang 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 music, I don't think it does, but that's totally okay. Flowcharts. If you are writing interactive content, it's not a lot of people in India are doing it right now. There are certain companies, if you want to check them out, one is, I think they're called Folion. I follow them, where they're now saying, okay, you shouldn't write PDF anymore. All of your content should be like interactive content. Basically, something that you have to read a part of, and then you have to click on a button, and then you can uncover the next part. And doing this what it would also enable is your audience doesn't have to put their email at the beginning. They can read half of the content, and then share details with you and everything. It's a very cool thing, interactive content. Please check it out. I mean, I think it's the future of content marketing. But yeah, if you're doing something like that, you can also create a flow chart which says, this is a question. If your answer is yes, go through this journey. If your answer is no, go through that journey. And that's also something you can do from a content marketing perspective. And this is also okay. Why am I telling you this? Because I have heard a lot of people self-rejecting, a lot of writers self-rejecting and saying, hey, I wanted to do that, but I did not feel it will fit in my story. No, it will. If it's progressing forward, obviously it's fitting in your story. Then they're like, I don't think it makes sense from an experience perspective. Anything makes sense over a block of text, right? So yes, all of these things are completely okay. One must not always try the surprise and the big reveal structure. In fact, avoid it as much as possible. Even especially in the written format content. Right now, again, full disclaimer, I'm a fan. If you guys were in the, I don't know if how many of you are in the same age group as I am, but if you watched that movie Race, the first one in theaters, I was like very excited about that movie. The way that in the end you find out who's like the negative character and everything, I was like, oh, that's so cool. And I've always been like, I'll write an abstract and I'll say, hey, I will tell you this big thing. And I tried to do it a lot when I was doing written content. And then over a period of time, I saw my leadership just coming back and changing those titles and saying, explain what are you telling them? And I'm like, why are people against, building up? This is why. Not everybody loves surprises. It's a human fact. A lot of people don't appreciate surprises. Besides that, if you have a big reveal, for example, imagine in this presentation, the title was, I'll tell you how to, the title is, I'll tell you how to build a strong narrative. And then I started the presentation with, this is what a narrative is, this is storytelling, this is yay, whoa, and you're 15 minutes in and you've still not talked about the step number 1 of how to build a narrative. People are already thinking of step number 1 the minute the presentation has started. So your first 15 minutes, the audience has lost interest. They're like, okay, this was supposed to be something, which it is not. This is clickbaity. And the audience will be like, okay, I'm done. I don't want this. So your audience will lose interest faster in a surprise and big reveal structure if you're trying to follow that from a content perspective, right? If your first 15 minutes of content is important, I mean, in this case, this was not important, but say you are saying something which is important, even then, because your audience is so focused on that big surprise or whatever key takeaway you have promised to them, right? Their attention will be diverted. They'll be like, okay, what's coming? When is this thing going to come up? When are they exactly going to talk about this topic from the key takeaway and stuff like that? So that's another thing why a surprise and big reveal structure is a bit challenging. The last one, and I've personally felt this, is that it puts a lot of pressure on you as the content creator. For example, if you are writing, if you're doing a webinar and you've written this, in this, your abstract reads, in this webinar, we will uncover 5 biggest challenges that your company is facing and, deliver 3 exceptional solutions or something like that. By the way, I tried to do something similar in the description that I've sent you. It puts a lot of pressure. Trust me, I went back so many times and I was like, oh, am I covering 7 points? Am I doing 6 points? Am I doing whatever number I promised and stuff like that? So it puts a lot of pressure. You can't take that pressure in your day job. You can't do it on an everyday basis. And if you're not able to deliver, then no matter, I mean, if I'm not able to deliver on everything from the key takeaway, then, no matter how good this is going so far, it's not going to work out. So yes, try to keep your surprise and reveal structure in control. I'll take this last slide and then we'll see if there are any more chats or questions that I need to answer immediately. You must always proofread your narrative without a creator's bias. This is very important, something that I see a lot of people don't do. What does this mean, right? You've written on a structure, you've written down, like, okay, this is all that I'm going to talk about. And you also made your presentation, for example, and then you're like, now detach yourself from being the person, okay, who has written it, and then go through every slide and be, okay, can you jump from one point on your narrative to the other if you did not have, or rather, if you had the same level of knowledge about the topic as your audience does? No, then it's not a strong narrative. I can't jump between a lot of these points if I don't use these very long titles, like, cool, you have hooked them, and all the titles that you've seen in this presentation so far. I couldn't do it. I would fumble. I'd be like, acha, how do I move directly from credibility to making your audience care? It's difficult, right? Because those are not innately linked ideas. So something like that you will find when you're proofreading. This is obviously an updated version of this presentation. I did one version and Ishan and I sat and just discussed it once briefly. And I was like, okay, how am I moving from here to here, right? Questions like that. So do that, proofread, and add those extra level of details that will help you move from one part of the story to other. When you will do that, you will actually add all the fillers that are missing from your narrative. Two things that you can, two kinds of questions you can ask yourself. First is in terms of if you need to eliminate something. And these are the questions that you can ask. Do 2 sentences set the same context? Are 2 statements making the same point? Is your story at a standstill for too long? Is it the voice? No? Okay. Has your example, if you're giving an example at some point, has it become such a detour that your audience has forgotten what you were talking about? If things like that are happening, then you need to eliminate some parts of it. In terms of if you need to add something, you can ask questions like, is it feeling incomplete at some point? Is it feeling emotionless? Does it, if you were the reader, will you click on the call to action? If if the answer to any of those is a no, then you probably want to add something. So yeah, this is these are some sort of best practices that I've learned. Oh, right, I have one more. I'm sorry, I added this yesterday. Saloni had put something on LinkedIn and I was like, probably should talk a little bit about it. Make narrative choices that do not reduce the shelf life of your content. There's a clicking keyboard cracking sound. Can somebody be on mute?
I think it's
okay. Cool. Thanks, guys.
That's done.
Thank you. Anyway, so in the age of content repurposing, this is mandatory. What is content repurposing? Saloni, you did a very great topic, like right up on that. I told you that as well. I mean, the idea is if you create one content, why do you want to use it only once, right? You should be able to write about it or republish it or take parts of it and use it 5, 6 other times. Totally support it. But sometimes what happens, right, is people make narrative choices that makes the shelf life of a content too little. What is the shelf life? For how long the content can remain in your repository and exist in the world outside. For example, if you add years in social events to your content, right? If you're saying something on the lines of, here is how 2021 is in comparison to 2020, you can use that only to like the first few months of 2021, because after that, nobody cares about 2020. Or you can only use that in 2021. By the time 2022 comes, at a bare minimum, you have to go back and change like 2021 everywhere in your entire narrative. Right? Social events, for example, COVID, again, it's still ongoing, but not a lot of people want to be hearing COVID. If you're reading marketing content, I'm sure you've seen the word crisis and pandemic taking over the term COVID, right? And if you have written like a lot of content with like COVID, you'd probably want, if you're republishing or repurposing it, you'd want to go back and change that, right? So that is an example of something that you can do, which is not viable for a very long shelf life. Or if you create a very long form content on a very short-lived instance, for example, holiday shopping during the COVID-19 lockdown. See, COVID is ongoing. The lockdown, or rather that big lockdown where nobody was able to get out of their house, that's not a very long drawn instance. Something like that you can't repurpose many times, because by the next holiday period, I mean, just recently, I think a colleague of mine shared a picture from some mall in New Delhi around Christmas, and they're like, this feels like we are the United States. and if to that audience in this social setting, if you're talking about, hey, there's a lockdown during the holiday season, it doesn't make sense, right? So that content, even though relevant to a certain degree, because of the choice of topic that you have made, is not relevant anymore. Try to have a couple of sub ideas in addition to the central idea. For example, the central idea of this presentation right now is how to build a narrative. But there are 2 other sub ideas in terms of, hey, things that I have learned and things that you must not do. So this way, if I have to reuse this presentation, right, I can change the focus a little bit. I can make this part of the story the hero the next time, or vice versa, something like that. So try to have a couple of sub ideas. If you are thinking of a long life content and you want, before getting started that you want to repurpose it, make sure you don't have only one central idea to exploit for the longest term. And then the last thing is create content pieces in a way that creating other format content pieces out of it is easy. One of my best examples is, and I do this a lot because I work with clients, and we build out a lot of client facing presentations. If you have a presentation deck, have like a one big idea, wow quote slide on it, and just like you'll have the entire video of your client doing the whole presentation, but just cut down that 1 minute on which client is saying that quote and sort of giving example or whatever. Sorry, that 1 minute quote is another content you can use as is. Now, if you have not already done that thinking before creating that presentation, okay, this is something that I want to create out of this content. This is something that, while republishing, I want to highlight, or while repurposing, then your content will not come out in that. So if you are also interested in content repurposing, if that's a focus area for you, these are some of the narrative choices or content creation choices that you can make while telling your story. All right, last part, but before that, Saurabhji, any questions, anything wrong?
No, we have some pretty good feedback, actually. A lot of good feedback.
Okay, cool. I hope it's all good and you guys are not just like doing it to, be like, अच्छा ये पहली बार आया है तो इसको ऐसे बोल दो.
No, I'm sure people are not doing that.
Cool. things which are a strict no. By the way, how are we doing on time? I've not checked. Oh, I'm already very past. Sorry. Things which are a strict no. And I mean like no. So incoherent storytelling. I said this before when I talked about chronology and everything. It may work sometimes in a video content, like I say, but very few people can do it well, and definitely not everybody takes it well. It's difficult to follow, easy to notice, and impossible to get over, right? Especially if you are like, acha, mujhe ek simple sa, tell me how to do narrative design, and I come and like give you 5 different things which are all clashing with each other. Then it doesn't make sense, and it's annoying, like I said, right? For example, this session itself would make a lot less sense if I start with some best practices, which is things that you should do, then go to things not to do, and then come back to narrative design best practices, which is again things that you should do. That's wrong, right? I started with things that you should do at a high level, then things that you should do based on things that I have learned and known, and then things that you should not do. That's a better structure to follow, because you're like, okay, this is to be done, this is to be not done, right? So that kind of context is very important for while telling a story. Changing your tone, it's very obvious when you move away from being informational to salesy in the same text. It does terrible things to the credibility that you have built out at the very beginning. It also makes the content look incoherent, right? Because it feels like that the content is written by 2 different people. One who is trying to advocate or rather educate me, and the other one who's trying to sell to me. So don't change your tone. It's a very strict no. If you have decided to be educational, be educational. If in the rare instance you have decided to be on the top salesy and stuff like that, then be like that. But don't be like a part of it I'm educational, part of it I'm salesy, part of it I'm formal, part of it I'm cracking jokes, stuff like that. No, it's very disintegrating, and you're like, there's no connect that's formed in the entire content. Okay, I wish Ishan was here for this particular point, because I have had some conversations about this topic. Strict no, including humor, unless you know your audience will get it. Guys, if you're writing for a business, most of you are still young, and you're writing for a business that's targeting, like I said, 50-year-old, 60-year-old CFOs, CEOs, and stuff like that. Humor is very difficult to work with, because comedy can very, very easily turn to cringe. If you know that your audience will find something very funny, by all means, go and include it in your content. But if you're not sure, and I mean like 100% sure, this is not something I will even advise that you try as a professional content creator, right? Because with like doing humor the wrong way or cracking a joke in the wrong way, I mean, the easiest you'll get off is you'll come across as misinformed, but the worst you will come across is offensive, right? And I'll explain this to you with a personal example. It has not happened in a large setting, but I do a lot of marketing to the EMEA group, okay? Like the EMEA, Europe, London, Germany, Amsterdam, that marketing region. And the cultural differences are very, like, they stand out like quite clearly. Obviously, Indians have learned a lot of stuff from the British colonization and stuff like that. So there are similarities, but what they find funny, you will be like, what is funny about that? And what might be funny according to us is just off-putting to them. So when I'm writing for that audience, as a conscious choice, I try to avoid being flimsy or like cracking jokes and stuff like that, because there's a very high likelihood that it would come across as offensive. Also, on this general note, check if the words you're using are a part of your reader's vocabulary. This has happened to me like in a larger social setting. I use the word grievance redressal in one of my presentations. Okay, it's a term Indian law. IPC has grievance redressal mechanism and stuff like that. I thought that's super cool. I introduced it, I wrote it. It did not, I mean, nobody caught it. It happened, that webinar happened. And then this was a US audience. And then people are like, what is a grievance? Or what's redressal, right? And then, I mean, even my speaker didn't know that very well because they had just like, done the story that I had sort of explained with them. And it became awkward for a minute. And then obviously they covered it up and everything. And then later I found out that grievance redressal is not a word that they use in the US. They say handling grievances or, something to that effect. So, and then, yeah, it was like a very rare moment in my professional career. So yeah, general vocabulary, right? How do people talk, stuff like that, you should know a little bit of, because again, snaps right off the story and people are like, oh, I mean, this audience doesn't know my culture and the native details and stuff like that. Extreme detailed and specific examples are also no. I know I said introduce examples, but don't write examples which are like 3 lines, 4 lines of text. Your storytelling examples shouldn't be too extreme. They should not be too specific, because if they are, they're easy to go out of context and become a content of itself, right? For example, as an example, if you're sharing a case study, just say X company did this, click here to know more, versus saying with HighRadius XYZ solution, this company did that, and then you've lost me. Then I'm like, Acha. Even though I know that my content is continuing later, but I'm like, okay, this is gone, right? This has gone into the salesy territory. It's not coming back from there. So yes, don't do very specific examples. Don't do very detailed examples. If you have to do those, use links and like redirect people versus just adding it like text into your story. My favorite mistake that a lot of if you're a student or if you're like just beginning to create content for a business, this is a very common mistake that many of us do without realizing, is not sticking to a person, character, or tense. What is person? The grammar rule, right? First person, second person, third person. So many people, they write some content and then it goes, we are concerned about your business. You should be focused on doing this. And then these third parties or partners don't know what they're doing and stuff like that. Who is this presentation for? Who is this content for? We as in we, I know in this case, we is me as in HighRadius, and then you is the customer and third party is somebody else. They, but you can't have one content that's first person, second person, third person as well, unless it's divided into 3 different paragraphs. One paragraph, stick with one person. If you're saying things in the HighRadius, from the HighRadius point of view, then continue saying things in the HighRadius point of view, unless you say something on the lines of what this means for you, and then you can jump to the customer's perspective. But don't, without making that connect, don't do first person, second person, third person, because I mean, if you read something like written like that, you'll just go, who is that meant for? Who is we? Who is I? Who is you? Stuff like that. Know who you're writing for, and don't change that in the middle of a story. For example, you're writing for, like I said, 20 to 25-year-old, girls who shop from Zara, which is like an urban population and stuff like that. Now, in the middle of a story, you can't be like, Zara also has a very nice kids collection, by the way, or a very nice men's collection. Dude, I mean, your audience is somebody else. They came understanding or knowing that it's meant for them, and then you are, for random reasons, marketing something else to them, which, yes, in some cases, sure, they must know kids and they must know, like, guys in their life. That's totally okay, but that's not very professional, and that's a very incorrect way of telling the story. If you want to do something like that, use links, redirect them again. Again, clearly define what's in the past, the present, and the future. We talked about this before, so I'll not delve too much into it. And that is that. Again, I think this is the last slide. So complex narrative with too many ideas is something that you shouldn't do. A very long narrative with too many competing ideas will confuse your audience. Instead of having 5 problems and 3 solutions in the same content, just like create multiple narratives which are connected to each other. Basically create 3 different blogs and connect them to each other via links, but don't try to explain too much in one. I think this presentation itself became too much in one. So there's that. And in case of long presentations, add depth to each idea instead of adding new ideas to the deck, right? For example, if somebody says, should you speak about one topic in a lot of detail or 5 different topics? It depends on your audience. If you're speaking with a beginner's audience, the latter is better. But for a more advanced professional audience, usually depth in 1 or 2 ideas is better than writing 10 different ideas. I have done this. I have done it wrong for very long. We've created 60-minute webinars with 60 slides and 10 different content ideas and stuff like that. But if I could go back and change a lot of that today, I would, just put 25 things, like 25 slides and spend 2 minutes on each section, which is why I covered at the beginning of the session what I will not tell you today. Because if I tried to add each of those things in this presentation as well, I already took, I don't know, 1 hour 35 minutes. I mean, we would have been here until the end and you would not have followed anything. So yeah, ending it here. I know I'm like rushing through a little bit, but I'm a little tired. But yeah, we covered 29 actionable things that you can start doing as a content creator right from tomorrow. So I hope you found this useful. I'm not doing a thank you slide. I'm revising what we have discussed here so that you go back to that call to value point and you know the value that we have gotten out of the session. And this was the 3 things that I told you you're going to get out of it. The 6 stages of creating an impactful narrative, including 2 that people often miss out. We covered that. That's creativity, making your audience care, relatability, solutioning, examples, and CTA or call to value. The 2 that are often missed out are relatability and examples. Things that you must never do, especially when writing and creating a story for a business. That was the last section. And 7 hacks that I've learned in my experience of creating 250 plus stories for my current organization. That was the second part of the story. So yes, we covered all of the key takeaways. I took a little bit longer than I should have, but I hope you found this actionable. You found it useful. You found examples that you will be able to implement. That is my biggest thing, because a lot of content marketing sort of workshops and lectures become very preachy. To do this, be relatable, be emotional, but without like how to be relatable, how to be emotional and stuff like that. So I hope you found some actionable insights here, and that you'll be able to use that. Thank you so much.
I think you finished just in time because we started 5-6 minutes late, if you remember. It took exactly 1 or 30 minutes. Very good, man. We have some questions, I guess. We have one question
Yes.
from Srija.
I will. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prashant. I'm trying. Okay. How do we understand if our content is imparting in-depth knowledge or becoming information overload for the audience? Proofread, like I said, right? We talked about this at one point. Proofread your narrative without the creator's bias. If it's becoming too much overload for you, I mean, if it's becoming, like say 70% for you, understand that for your audience, it has already gone beyond 100% because you are still attached to the content that you are creating, right? If it's becoming too much for you, cut down. That's the best sort of way to look into it and make that happen. But beyond that, if you're in a work setting, you can always also ask your peers who are in the same industry and who write for the same audience to be like, hey, does this make sense? And I'm sure they can give you that feedback if you are having a difficult time getting it for yourself. So yeah, those are the 2 things that will help. If I can think of anything more, I'll definitely sort of write in the group and I'll send that out. Thank you, guys. This has been interesting. All right.
Avinash, people looks like people really liked you. You're
Guys,
getting a lot of positive feedback from everyone. Preeti
thank
also
you.
to thank you, but I think she mistakenly sent it to me in direct messages.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I also
Thank you
think,
so
man, you
much.
really got some energy and like especially your abilities to explain everything with examples. That's really something. Although I'm
Yes.
not in the content marketing, like not content marketing, I'm not in the content writing space, but I create a lot of content strategies for our clients. I'm working on PR actually, and those credibility, the points on your credibility and relatability, that
Yes.
really makes sense to me.
I think those would apply to all content formats, including PR. Yes, I was actually telling Shorajit before everybody else joined. I thought that this meeting was tomorrow, so I was hoping to do a lot of this presentation designing part today. So guys, I established that I work in the marketing team. So yes, I can do presentations slightly better than this from a visual perspective, but two things. I wanted to be able to share this with people who have not been able to join, and they can read and understand a lot of the concepts that we got. And B, I just made it like a lot of it in terms of putting it together. I put it together yesterday, and one version Ishan and I had reviewed. So I hope I was able to give enough examples to make sense of everything that we have talked about. That is the important part, guys. I mean, just the actionable part is the examples, and knowing what not to do and what to do both. Rest, I think, dude, it's a continuous learning curve. I think, content is evolving as a whole. So we just need to continue evolving further. So there's that. Cool. Thank you, Sharajit. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me via WhatsApp or LinkedIn. That's totally fine.
Yeah. Oh, why don't you share your LinkedIn ID in the chat?
Oh, yes, I should.
Yeah, Avinash, I have a question.
Yes.
It's just a question like, what, in your perspective, what do you think, how will content will evolve in future? Like, how will it take its shape, and what is the future of content now?
Okay. So I think one thing that I discussed about is this interactive content experience. I think that's really popping up right now, where instead of having PDFs, you will have one, like I think Medium does it. I'm not very active on the platform, right? But you read something and then you have to essentially click at every step to read further, because the idea there is that people can only take so much in one go, and when you have like an entire long PDF to go, it's very easy to get scared and just move out. How many times have you go in and you see something which is like 66 pages of a PDF and you're like, a child need a good 1 month to solve this and figure this out. So I think interactive content is one thing that will definitely evolve. I know people are saying video content. Everybody's like, hey, video content, video content, video content. Personally, I think video content will evolve for a certain audience group. For this generation, if you're marketing to like a 25-30-year-old people, like the audience, then yes, video content is something that you can focus on. But if you're also marketing to like a 50+ audience, their way is set. They'll still like to read like long blogs and white papers with examples and stuff like that. So I think video content is something that will evolve depending on the industry that you are in. And yeah, dude, example driven content, right? That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest policy I see in a lot of marketing webinars that I attend, where you're just like, okay, there are so many things you're talking about, but how do I really do it? From a business perspective, that is something that will happen, and new formats of content have already started emerging, right? People have stopped moving away from like a checklist to more of a how-to list, right? That's the whole example driven content. So I think those are, off the top of my head, 3 things that you can expect to see: interactive content, more example driven content, and a certain evolution in the video content and video content industry.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for answering. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Saloni, and thanks, guys. I took a lot of your time, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah. I was supposed to
spend 1.5 hours today on a weekend, and
so
congrats, Avinash. I'm sure you didn't bore them. You kept them hooked up with your.
I hope so.
Yeah,
guys, that's my LinkedIn. Happy to connect and answer any more questions that I can. Thank you so much for joining today. And like I said, there are many other aspects of content marketing. So we can discuss, and if there's genuine interest in some of the other topics, I'd be happy to sort of, volunteer and take one of those workshops. And there's a very large content marketing talent that I have formed connections with. So I can discuss with Ishan and see if we can get some more people to do this. So yes, thank you so much. You guys are doing some great work together, guys.
thanks, Avinash. Thanks, everybody. I'm sure we'll have some more incoming workshops from Avinash in the coming months.
All right.
So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.